Stop messing around, stop fooling around, stop delaying, stop procrastinating. Get up, get out, get it done. Everything is possible, nothing is a problem, and anything can be overcome. I just get my ass up out of bed, I get my shit together, and I get out and I start the fight. And that will transform you from a mere mortal into a superhuman being. I've never, ever, ever met anybody who told me that they got rich watching their IRA or their 401k. Welcome to the Daily Cash Flow. I'm Peter Siegel. Today I've got a special treat. We're here with my friend Fred Beans. And Fred is the chairman of the Fred Beans family of car dealerships. We're here in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. Fred operates in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, and in New Jersey. He employs about 1,750 people and has annual revenues of approximately $1.4 billion. I think we're all going to learn a lot from Fred today. So, Fred, how old are you?
81 years old.
81. Where are you from?
I actually grew up on an 86-acre farm in Mooresville, Pennsylvania.
So you're born and bred in Bucks County?
Bucks County, yep.
Okay. Tell me about your family growing up.
Well, I was an only child. My mother was a Presbyterian. My father was a birthright Quaker. So I was pretty much educated as a Quaker. I went to George School, and of course when you got off the school bus in those days, you worked on the farm. So I can sort of a byproduct of World War II. I can remember the end of World War II. I can remember the rationing. I remember the gas stamps and those things.
What did your parents do?
Well, my dad had a farm equipment business and a farm with my mother, and my dad went broke during the Depression. He did not file bankruptcy, but one day the Yardley Bank just didn't open. And consequently, whatever you had was gone. And my dad lost his business. So he spent the rest of his life working the farm, and he did sell farm equipment. I remember he represented in Doylestown, PA, an international harvester dealer that later got Oldsmobile and Cadillac. In those days, my dad got a percentage of the sale. So my dad never received a paycheck. He sold the equipment, billed the equipment, collected for it, and got 6% of the cash difference. I remember that. So I used to go with my dad a lot and visit farmers. That's primarily what we did every Saturday. Got in a car and went from one farm to the other.
Tell me about your mom.
My mom sort of more or less ran the farm, took care of the bookkeeping of the farm. It was a truck farm. It's called truck farming, and we used a cooperative to haul a product to New York City every night around 2 in the morning. A fellow farmer would pick up the crops, but truck farming is all the things that you would eat: sweet corn, potatoes, string beans, lima beans, tomatoes, all the high-intensity, high-work items.
And what were they like as parents? Were they supportive? Were they disciplined? Did they parent you with discipline? Can you remember?
I think a person with a farm background, and my dad was always, he had went to George School, and my dad went there in 1807.
Your dad went to George School?
1807, yep. He was a boarder. He lived in Washington Crossing. And the interesting story was when my dad was 16 years old, he developed appendicitis. And they got a doctor from Philadelphia to come up on a train to Yardley and horse and buggy to the farm with an assistant and took the appendix out on the farm in Washington Crossing. So I always remember that story because it was a long recovery. So a lot of fond memories about growing up on a farm because you learn how to sort of survive and do things on your own.
Which you've certainly carried those skills forward, I think.
Well, if you said were you successful, I'd say it's about my mother and father, and then I'd say the farm, and the farm. Because the lessons of a farm is you always have something to do, and you always have work to do, and I think it's a good discipline. It's a good way of life that you can reflect back on at the end of the day.
So you enjoyed it?
I did enjoy it.
You never wished it was different? You never saw other families and kids doing different things and said, that looks fun?
Well, I think that when you got off the school bus, only child, you were at home with the farm and the dog became especially when things didn't go right in the house, the dog became a good friend. But I think it gave you a certain work ethic, discipline, appreciation, the simplicities that aren't there today. And there's a lot to be said for storing around. There's a book called Managed by Storing Around. And there's a lot to be said by stories at the kitchen table and what we learned by the discussions at the kitchen table that I think are missing in families today.
So without thinking about it too long, tell me a memory that jumps out about your mom.
Well, I can't remember that as much as I can remember a story about my father. We used to get workers that they were called migrant workers that would come to our farm, and we had a rowboat. And I remember they decided to go swimming in the Delaware River, and they let the boat out, unhooked it, and my dad went down there and went back up to the house, and he was a Quaker, so they're pacifist. He got a shotgun and went down and had a Chevrolet Coupe, a 46 Chevrolet Coupe, and that's a very small car, and put 4 of them in the car and the shotgun standing up in the middle, and took them to a constable to get damages for the damages they'd done at our dock, which was probably about $11 in those days. But my dad seemed to have no fear of anything. Today, to put 4 guys in a car and stand your shotgun up, I don't think he'd get out the driveway. So that was kind of a memory of being on the farm.
You mentioned a little bit about your schooling. You were in the military?
I was in the U.S. Coast Guard.
For how long?
6 months and 6.5 years of active duty.
Do you feel like that gave you certain mindset or skills to be in business today?
I think everybody today, especially more today, because it was more expected in my age group, I think everybody should have some type of, even if you don't want to shoulder a weapon. And I learned how to use a weapon in the Coast Guard. I was a shore patrol, but I'm not a weapons guy. And but I think compulsory government service of some type is good for all of us. I think getting up in the morning and at a certain time, shaving, walking to the flagpole, saluting the flag, they're all good disciplines, and certainly somebody paid the price before we did.
So thinking back to your schooling years, your kid, do you think there's anything that you wish that they had taught you in school?
I guess I wish, I only had 2 years of college. I wish that, I'm an avid reader today, and I think knowledge is power, and I'm kind of obsessed with learning. And the older I get, the more I want to read, the more I want to learn. I wish I was a little bit better student. I was very interested, maybe it was because of the farm, that I thought the natural thing was man was really made to work.
Why weren't you a better student? Was that a choice, or was that something else?
Well, I really didn't have an interest in learning a foreign language. I was pretty good at math. I loved history. I liked physics. I didn't care for chemistry. I think so much in education has to do with what teachers you had. And I remember my 5th and 6th grade teacher. As a matter of fact, I spoke to him 2 years ago. He's 93 years old. And he was a mentor. Most of my buddies that are still alive, my friends, we still talk about him because he was a good mentor.
What was his name?
Howard Stringer. He went off to be principal of Council Rock and retired in that job, I believe.
So what made you want to get into business? You know, what was the thing or the time or the period in your life where you said, you know, business is the path for me? I mean, you could have been anything.
I always thought that owning your own business was a chance for you to become all you can be. And I used to go to work with my dad when he sold farm equipment on Saturdays, and that was probably when I was 12 years old, and we'd ride from one farm to the other farm, and I can remember my dad getting on a tractor in a field, and farmers didn't stop in those days, and standing on the tongue and going around the hedgerows when the tractor was plowing. And then, of course, growing up after the war, technology and advancements in tractors and cars and the Steel Pier down in Atlantic City, General Motors exhibit. I really got, all guys my age had a real interest in cars because it was a big thing when a new car came out. And the dealership where my dad worked at, the farm equipment, eventually got an Oldsmobile Cadillac dealership, and I hung around there when I was 12 years old to 15. I worked there.
Run that by me again. Your dad got a dealership?
No, my dad was a farm equipment that my dad sold.
Sold, okay.
And in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, that farm equipment dealer after the war got an Oldsmobile Cadillac franchise. So I used to go with my dad, and I'd hang around the service department on Saturday because they were open. And cars were everything to a young guy in those days. I mean, it was exciting, okay? And when a new car came out, it was one day a year, the day that the new Oldsmobile came out. And they were all covered up in the back, and people would come in, and I remember that since I've been in business. I remember when the new Cadillac came out and they downsized it, and that was the worst new car announcement they ever saw because people came in, and I just became a Cadillac dealer, and they looked at that car and left. And that car proved itself to be part of the downturn of General Motors. It was a disappointment to people.
What was your first business on your own, not with your dad involved with the farm equipment and that kind of thing? What was the first thing on your own?
I guess when I started, my dad was pretty frugal, and after we sold the farm, we moved to Yardley, and I used to cut grass for neighbors and use his lawnmower. And I remember that he said it was wear and tear, so I paid him a fee every time I used a lawnmower. Then I went to Rider College, and I needed a part-time job. So I started to work in a service station and Yardley, in a very, very nice place. And I'm very proud of it today because it's really run quite well. And I bought it when I was 20 years old. My mother signed a note. My dad didn't want to sign a note because he was a director in a little bank in Yardley. My mother signed a note, which my dad said, your mother will sign it. I don't want to do it, but it'll be better if something goes wrong. So my mother went with me on a Monday, and I borrowed $5,500. And I started as one employee, and when I left there, I had about 14. I built a car rental business there, a national car franchise. But I always had this idea that I wanted to be a car dealer. And that's pretty hard to break into. Today, it'd probably be almost impossible for a guy like me to start today. But I was lucky enough to find a young guy whose parents were failing in Newtown, Pennsylvania. And I had taken with him, he went with me to look at several dealerships for sale. And he was a Yale graduate, going to law school, and quit to save the family business. And I told him I was going to buy a dealership in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. And he said, why don't you come and see me? So I went to see him, and my dad was never high on partners, but he offered me an opportunity to buy in at 25%. And I bought in there at 25%, and I just worked 7 days a week. I don't know if I can do it today, but in those days I could outwork most people. And going from a garage and repair shop to an automobile dealership, it was sort of like a piece of cake. It wasn't the hard work, and I worked hard, and we did a heck of a job with that place. We really built it into something.
What was the dealership?
It was Bill Marsh Ford in Newtown, and I left there in 1975, and I bought it back 45 years later. And the fellow that owned it did very little to it, and I found things there. I wanted to be alone the night I bought it back, and the night I bought it back, I stayed there by myself for a while, and it was kind of nostalgic, but I found things that, scrapbooks where I had put newspaper ads. We used to save news. Everything in the car business in the 70s was how creative you were in a newspaper. So I found copies of the newspaper ads and my original franchise agreement. In those days, you had to get to be a dealer, you had to get a physical and a doctor's note that you were of sound mind. And I found that recently down there in a dealership. So it's rewarding to buy it back. The problem with that store now, Doylestown has become pretty aggressive as far as a dealership goes, and we own a store in Langhorne, so it's really, I'd say, squeezed pretty hard by two dealerships that have a lot more space. Probably call them more of a giant in the market than that place. But
So you went from one service station in Yardley to your next move was a dealership.
yes,
Not a second service station.
no. When I was at that service station, I bought a national car rental franchise. And I found it was very difficult because you go to visit these franchise companies and they don't want to talk to a guy from a service station. I finally found a guy from Oldsmobile that liked me, and he was helpful. And he gave me he was the assistant manager, and they were a lot more like God to a guy like me in those days. And he gave me the names of all dealers that didn't have sons, because usually that was the natural progression in those days. So I used to take one day a week off and visit these guys to talk to them to see if they'd want to sell to me. But I was very lucky. Bill Marsh had took a chance on me, and I got the opportunity to go there. And from there, it was just plain hard work.
So I know your mom signed for the note for $5,500 to buy the service station. How did you fund the car rental and the purchase of the 25% interest in Marsh?
It's funny, but I was a very good saver. I lived at home, and I did a very good job. I made a lot of money in those days. I think in 1972, I paid income tax on $75,000, which is a heck of a lot of money. And I started to buy houses when I was 20 years old, before I was married. So I bought a house on Glen Olden Road. Didn't take much money in those days. A really nice house. You could live in it today. I paid $18,000 for it. Then I bought another house with apartments in it in Marsville, Pennsylvania. It took $4,000.
Did you still own the first house when you bought the second?
No, don't own any of them anymore. Bought the second house in Marsville, which had a hobby shop in it and 2 apartments. Bought another house with 4 apartments in it. So as soon as I get enough money, I buy a house with apartments in it, because I thought, geez, how much can you make in a service station? This is a retirement income, right? And I had a good sense of humor, always had a good sense of humor. So I painted all the front doors on the houses red, because I was only 23 at the time when I owned my third house. And by the way, I had to go into service for 6 months, which was, and then one night a week, and for 6.5 years and 2 weeks every summer. But long and the short, I painted the houses red because I knew they were going to operate in the red.
You're 23 years old at this point?
Yeah.
3 houses,
Yeah.
a service station, and 25% of a dealership.
No, I didn't become an opportunity to go to the dealership. I was 32 years old, and I went to the dealership on February 28, 1972. And then it's funny, I always went to meetings, and when there was a meeting there about working together with people, and I saw the dealer in Doylestown, and I knew he wasn't doing good because I knew the numbers he was producing against what we were producing in Doylestown. And I asked him if I could talk to him. And that's sort of in the old days. It was the key was, can I come and visit with you? And I went and visited with him, and it took me about 7 months, which I lost about 15 pounds, slept on a sofa, trying to get him to sign, because things were pretty tight in 75. 74, we went through a crunch. Right. Went through the gas crunch in 73, 74, and that drove a lot of good. And he was building a new building, and so I met him at the Ford meeting, and it took me about 6 months to get him to sell. I didn't have Ford approval. Continental Bank didn't want to give me the mortgage. It was a industrial development mortgage at the time, but things were pretty bad in America, and so I never took no for an answer. I drove down to Continental Bank, put a suit and tie on, went in and asked for the president of the bank, got to speak to him, and said, look, I don't really need the facility in Doylestown. All I want is the franchise. I think the facility is too big. The facility I operate today might be a little small, but they changed their mind because they didn't want an empty building, and they let me assume the mortgage. So at that time, I hadn't had Ford approval. I took the risk of putting in $125,000 to keep the dealership alive. And then So I really started with $125,000.
Yeah.
We took the physical inventory. The guy wasn't broke. Found out he had $86,000 more in parts inventory, which is money, than he thought he had. So I paid him out over 5 years, whatever that was, like $250, $300 a week. And I closed on a dealership. And you needed Ford approval, but I didn't want it to close. I always worried if the dealership filed bankruptcy and closed, it might be, number one, it might not be me that got it, and that's why I took the risk of putting the money in it. And that's sort of how it all grew.
So $125,000 out of your pocket, and the bank gave you what?
The bank at those days gave me nothing. Nothing. I got a floor plan line, the note for $86,000, and took over the mortgage.
Took over the mortgage. They allowed you to assume. How big was the mortgage?
The mortgage on that building was about $440,000.
That's a lot.
And
for them.
I would think been a lot of improvements made to that building, but I would think that the building, and then we've acquired, had a little farm next to it, a neighbor across the street, another neighbor across the street. We sort of grew by acquiring those places, and just kept growing.
So the $125,000 that you paid in cash to do that deal, that was an accumulation of profits from being in business for, it sounds like 9 years or 10 years maybe?
Well, no, I was there 12 years.
12 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
I might have a little more money than that. I owned my house. In those days, you were brought up to believe, and a mortgage was about 5 to 6%. It was pretty easy to pay off a house if you had a $15,000 mortgage on it. You know, it seemed easier than today.
Right.
It seemed like your money went a lot further.
Right.
I remember that, you know, $1 bought you almost 4 gallons of gas.
So $125,000, you're in the dealership, bank lets you assume the note, you're off and running at that point.
Right.
One service station and a dealership.
Service station I sold to a gentleman who worked for me that actually applied maybe 5 years before that on a bicycle, didn't have a driver's license. So I hired him part-time, and then he became full-time, graduated from school, and I hired him. And once I decided to go to Bill Marsh, and that was on a Saturday, I showed up on a Monday morning. I called him to my house, and I shook hands with him, and I sold it to him for $55,000. We didn't own the real estate, on a buyout that he paid me weekly for 5 years.
No problem, right?
Nope. His son works for me today.
Yeah.
And he, by the way, he retired at 55 years old.
And that deal was done on a handshake?
Handshake. But a lot of things were done on handshakes. And I remember we bought a store one night, and we were in New Holland, and we bought a store in Boyertown, Pennsylvania. Want a funny story?
Yeah.
It was snowing at the service station one day, and I never liked people calling me chief or pal. And a guy blew his horn out on the corner. It was snowing, so I ran out, and I felt like giving him bum directions until I looked in the car, and he had hand controls. And lived on Makefield, Edgewood Road. And you probably would, his wife's name was Spence. And he was injured and became a psychiatrist at Trenton State University. So I had a paradigm shift, and I drove him home one day, and I found out that his wife had a brother that was a Ford dealer. So that kind of helped me network. And we shook hands with him to buy the dealership, his dealership after that, about 10 years later. And I had another partner that we had bought a store in New Holland, PA. When we shook hands, I said, Jeff, what do you think? He said, we don't have a deal. I said, why do you say that? He said, the handshake was no good. And I felt the same way. It's funny. The hand didn't look me in the eye. And a couple of days later, he sold it to somebody else. But luckily enough, when that somebody came with a written agreement, it wasn't what it was supposed to be, okay? So he went into hibernation for a while, and then I wrote him a letter and said, look, I understand that these are love affairs. They're like a spouse, and I can understand how you feel, and I'm not upset about it. I probably would have done the same thing. So I always think you have to give people an out if they do something that's not right. And
yeah.
I got a retired Ford dealer, two of them, that knew him, and I got a retired Ford exec. And we went to dinner with him one night in a hotel room. And I told him at dinner that night, I'm not leaving till, and I rented a room, we're not leaving until we write a contract on a yellow piece of paper. The Ford guy will write it. And that's how we bought that dealership in Boyertown, PA. And it's been a very nice place. So that's sort of how we grew, one at a time.
With a handwritten contract.
Yeah.
One at a time, and with money all that just was accumulating from being in business.
Yeah.
What was there?
We always saved in a dealership so much of our profit. Every month we saved X dollars of our profit. Been a little hard lately, but we still try to do that. Maybe not the right thing to do, but we've done a lot of it through investing in the stock market. My mother, raised on a farm, kept a journal, which I still have, back in the 40s, with a Philly Inquirer of all the stocks. She tracked the stocks manually every day. And I still have that ledger book. And so I started investing in the stock market. The business money and the savings all went in the stock market. Still does, probably not the right thing to do, but seemed to work. And
what other businesses are you in other than auto dealerships?
So we started to develop the parts business because I always thought that was a business could be developed and we weren't geographically restricted. And I had a good parts manager. In those days, you kept your parts inventory by hand. And we've grown to be the largest Ford parts dealer in the world in Doylestown, Pennsylvania.
When was this?
We started that business. We started growing our parts business the day we bought the place. And we just kept growing. And then we started to have meetings over at the Peddler's Village on a Saturday morning, one every 2 months, and talked about consolidating it all under one roof. And we started to consolidate the delivery service. And today we were lucky to buy a building that was like a sweatshop in Doylestown during World War II. It was sitting empty for $19 a square foot. Not much of a building, but it looks good today. It's not ideal, but it's got a lot of footprint, not a lot of height. And we started to consolidate the different brands, and that helped us because it helped us with a synergy of delivery by combining. You can't go to New York City with a Ford part for $7 to one guy. But so we decided to, and we probably need to learn a lot more about this because we certainly could learn from Amazon. Today we have 95 trucks, close to 300 people, and we have a 30,000-foot warehouse in Doylestown, 195,000. We have a cross dock in Sussex, New Jersey, where we run a tractor trailer or two every night. And then we put the parts in 12 trucks up there. It's kind of an odd type of thing.
Who are your customers?
Most of my customers are independent garages. And we do quite a bit of business with dealers because we have such a large inventory. It's not a good business model, but if you sell to a dealer in Somerville, New Jersey, and you make $10, at least you buy gas to go a little further in the truck and deliver it. So we're number one in overall sales for Ford in the United States. I'm very proud of that. But then Ford also puts us in categories. So every place you get measured, you want to be number one. And I think we're number 4 in government sales. That's mostly bids. We haven't been able to capture, and I don't know why, the city of New York, but that would be a good volume place with all the police cars. So we did that, and then we got some other government contracts where we bid on municipalities, and we've grown that business. It's proven to be pretty money intensive. The recession, whatever you want to call this, COVID-19 has caused us to lose a little bit of money because we had one large bankruptcy of $1 million. They deemed us, they were trying to stay in business, so they deemed us a critical supplier, and we got 55 cents on a dollar. But we've been able to grow that parts business. And then we started with one collision center. I like that business, so we grew to 6 collision centers. And then we have 2 CarQuest They're small auto parts businesses, one in Doylestown and one in Langhorne.
Collisions, parts, auto service, auto dealerships.
And we have auto rentals.
Auto rentals.
Yeah. I mean, that's always a work in process, but we have about 300 rental cars stationed at our different places.
I heard you talk about investing and buying real estate when you were a kid. I heard you talk about...
I got lucky in Doylestown, there was a young guy that was probably a couple years younger than me, pretty smart, hard-working attorney that liked real estate, and did a lot on his own, but I started to invest with him, and he was the brains, and I guess I supported it with not a lot of money, but it's been a real good relationship for me. We bought 2 pieces of empty ground. I think, if you live long enough, a lot of things come by your way. Like, the next thing you know, the property next door is for sale, and the property next door, and the guy gets older and he doesn't want his business. And we found that we went through that savings loan debacle. I mean, you're too young to remember that. Yeah, in the 80s. And we were able to go buy shopping center ground for, like in Doylestown. We bid at I guess what was that? RTC, I forget what it was called. It was, they had these auctions of real estate.
Right.
And we bought a few of them. And
Resolution Trust Corp, RTC.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So they'd hold these auctions.
Right. Government agency that was formed to manage the whole savings and loan.
I remember a lot about it, but we bought 3 nice places, which we later sold. We took in partners in Doylestown and built a Cross Keys shopping center. Then we did one down in Warminster. And then we bought a piece of property from the Archdiocese at auction, but it wasn't an absolute sale. And I remember we went to dinner that night and kind of celebrated, because it's now it's right here in Doylestown. It's the Conservancy.
Okay.
Can't think of the name of it.
So it wasn't an absolute sale. What does that mean?
Well, they didn't sell it. They changed their mind the next day. The Archdiocese changed its mind. So we kind of went to dinner that night to celebrate it.
Tough to argue with the Archdiocese.
Yeah, so that was the end of that. we lost that. But, and then I've invested with some commercial buildings, and I sort of liked the idea of investing with somebody that's smarter than me and tag along. And, it's helped.
So you're in business now for a long time. You've invested in a lot of different things. You've created a lot of different things. Looking back on all of it, if you could just pick one, real estate, stocks, auto dealerships, what was the best use of your money, of your capital for investing?
Probably the best investment was the $5,500 in Big Oak Service Center, because that grew to just about $1.4 billion in business and 1,750 employees from one. So I like the idea of buying a business, and the building we're sitting in here was an old, it made ductwork. And we fully utilized the basement. There's 14 people that work in the basement of this building, detailing cars. So, and we bought it for $550,000, and maybe it's worth $1 million today. It works out for us, and we have the property. So I think real estate, they're not making any more of it. I sort of like it. I sort of think you're on the right path, because I think there's going to be more and more renters in the future. And I wish I was a little smarter, but I kind of feel that that's where America's moving, especially with younger people. I don't know that they're that interested how important a house is.
I think they're interested in being flexible, having mobility, being non-committal, things like that. And home ownership is none of those things.
Certainly the commitment to the car is not the same, but there's so much competition today between the iPhones, the iPads, television, all the things that go on out there, recreation, that the car is not the predominant factor.
So the path of growing your business and getting to 81 years old with all of this history and background, you have to be good at managing people, motivating people, inspiring people. You don't get successful without being good with people. Talk to me about how you've managed to kick people in the ass along the way and form relationships and build relationships.
I've always, I was lucky to get exposed to Saturn and Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I might be known as a little bit grouchy today and a little bit strict about things. But I think I've always been willing to get out there, and I've always thought that planning was important. That everything you should do should be outlined in a plan, because you can stand back and look at it and rework it. And we're going to settle on a dealership next week, and I went over and met the employees today, and it's sort of fun. There was a book called I hate to say it, but The Game of Work. But work is sort of, you manage by storing around. You look at a complaint. I try to look at a complaint as a gift. If somebody gets mad at me today, I just say to myself, maybe that's bad parenting, and I take it like a man. Yeah. But usually we deserve it when we get it. But I think that it's like gardening, right? You plant, you weed, you feed, and you take care of it. And so, very interested in growing. It's kind of what keeps me going. Well, like I say, we're going to buy another Ford dealership next week, and I'm excited about the opportunity, about putting some of our people there in place that have grown from salespeople to managers.
A complaint is a gift.
Huh?
A complaint is a gift.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And sometimes it means a lot more if they're I've learned a lot from that, by the way. And if you have a complaint and you deliver it properly, you're probably going to win. If you come in with an attitude, no. But if you come in, it's served me well to think of it as a gift. What's something that you feel that you do better than anybody else? I think accountability to standards, having standards, and we wrote a service quality process book. It doesn't mean we live it. We have a sales quality process book. Service is about 160 pages. I'm sure not everybody's read it, but most dealerships don't have a manual of how they want to operate. So I think just like in this building, we have our standards. I hope we live them, but I think discipline's the soul of the Army. And the disciplines, I think you could feel discipline when you walk in a place. Is it easy for us? As you expand, it becomes harder and harder, because you hire people from the outside, when originally I hired people with I try not to hire anybody with sales experience. Interesting. In a world where we value experience, you don't want to hire someone with sales experience. Well, I think that in the old days it was one thing, but I think if we hired somebody without experience, we really want people to serve people and satisfy their needs. And yeah, we want them to have selling ability, but what's really important, friends do business with friends. And we don't win on our negotiating skills. Nobody does. But it's a difficult thing. My home phone number sits on everybody's desk. And I talked to an attorney, a labor attorney, that went to 3 of our places on Saturday. And one of them, she said that she felt sort of ignored, and that was hurtful to me, but I'm glad she delivered the message. I'm pondering quite how to deal with it, because I'm very big about recognizing a customer as soon as they walk in the building, and it's, you disappoint somebody. If you disappoint them, if you don't like McDonald's, why would you go to McDonald's in Flemington? That's what I say. So if you get a bad taste in your mouth at one of our dealerships, why would you go to another dealership? I'd think you'd assume. So that's why my home phone number sits on everybody's desk. Do your customers have access to you as well? 24 hours a day on my cell. Yeah, I don't get many calls at night, but I got, last month I sent out a mailer to 15,000 people, and I got 23 calls on my cell phone. You put your cell phone on a mailer? Yeah. And the benefit of that is, at least you can't test a person's integrity, or somebody could say it's a Nordstrom's, they could talk about their great customer service until you have a complaint and see how it's handled. You really don't know, right? So we could say we're an honest place to do business. Until you test me, you'll never know, right? So when you're in a small town, like Doylestown, 12,000 people, especially when we first came here. It wasn't the bedroom community that today it was, but word gets around pretty fast.
Yeah.
And I think word of mouth is the best.
What's something that you don't do well that you think you need to improve on?
Probably analyze the figures enough. Probably visit our dealerships enough and walk around. I think it's a book called Managed by Wandering Around, and I think it's good. The more I think somebody like me can be seen, and the more we can talk to people to work for us and encourage them, the better off we are.
You've seen a lot. You've done a lot. It's 2020. How is the world and the landscape for doing business today different than it was 20, 50, 60 years ago? What are people like? Are they same? Are they different? What is doing business like in the world today? Is it the same
I think
or different?
About 70% of our business today is a result of the internet. So making an appointment online or calling on the telephone. In the old days, a good Saturday, we might have 80 people show up to buy 20 cars. And we'd have people coming in at lunchtime to look at cars. People don't come in to look at cars anymore. They come in for one reason, to buy cars. I don't even know if we don't have literature today. I think we should, but it's all online.
Where do they go to look at a car?
It's all done online.
So they don't need to touch it or feel it?
I would say, I think they say an average buyer spends like 40 hours on, I should know that number, and I did know it, online. But on a good day, our record day at our Ford dealership was like 51 appointments. So we know if we make 50 appointments, if we do everything right, and these appointments. So we're not selling more cars, we're selling cars all over the place, which I don't know is as good, because you really want to sell the cars in your own backyard, because it's friends doing business with friends. And when you sell a car to Buffalo, New York on a Saturday, or Staten Island, you really got to be awful good, I say, to get that customer the next time say, I trusted Beans, I had a good experience, the hell with the internet, I'm going to come back. So it's all about, today it's all about the internet, the phone, and making an appointment. And we do that well in some places, in some of our dealerships we don't.
You've explained your growth, you've explained how you've accumulated profits from a business and redeployed those profits back into buying another dealership, and that's continued on for many years. Was there one event that happened for you along the way where you felt, wow, I made a lot of money? Was there one big check that you got, or one big event with money that occurred where you were like, wow, this is it?
That's an interesting question, Peter, because I think that money is a report card to running your business right. And, we went through some real bad times in 2008 and 2009. And I thought that I might have to file bankruptcy, because we were with the bank, Sovereign Bank. And Sovereign Bank was we were very loyal to, and Sovereign Bank went broke pretty much and got taken over by Santander. And Santander wrote a letter and said that they were going to stop floor planning on a certain date. And when you had a General Motors franchise, Ford, Chrysler, no bank wanted to touch you, because they were going to all go bankrupt. And I was scared. And I wrote a letter to the president of Santander. I think he came from Spain, I'm not sure. And I said it wasn't right to break a family business. And I wrote him a good, humble letter and asked if my daughter and I could come visit him. And we did. He was in Philly, and he called us, and we went and visited with him. I said, here's our financials. We're going to have to file bankruptcy if we don't, because when you sell a car, you pay it off. You don't have the money to, and we had a floor plan line of $100 million. We were done.
So the bank provides you with the liquidity to...
Yeah, and the bank sent 3 fellows down here in a Pilatus from Boston, and they spent about half a day walking around. And he kept us, and he said, do you know why you two are here today? He said, you're here because you're the only Americans who ever wrote me a decent letter. I guess he got a lot of flack when the bankruptcy came and Santander Bank, or Sovereign, was taken over. Probably too young to remember that, but it was pretty scary. And then we had a dealership we lost to General Motors, and I'm never a guy that would say, no, you can't do it. So I wrote a letter to Specter, And my daughter and I got down to Specter's office, and they brought a person in from General Motors was going through the hearings down there, the bankruptcy hearings, and and I remember riding over with Specter's assistant that day, and my daughter and I spent almost 2 weeks in Washington. I knew nothing about it. I'd knock on a congressman's door and I found out. They'll let you in. They don't, you can walk down to any one of those buildings as a citizen and knock on the door and walk in. And we went to knocked on a lot of doors about the bankruptcy because it was federally orchestrated bankruptcy. It wasn't normal. Many dealers got put out of business because they just said they don't want them anymore, and they bankrupt these families.
And what are you saying when you knock on a door and go in?
I told them it wasn't right. Wasn't right. And I remember that Specter got a gentleman there from General Motors, and we wound up getting a Chevrolet dealership instead of a Buick dealership out of that. But I think it taught me it's important to be supportive of no matter what side of the table you sit on. I like to believe that doing the right thing will give the right results. But I've never been a guy that took no for an answer. I think that once you're in business, no is really when a customer says no, they're not going to buy the car. I say to myself, well, I shouldn't say all these things to you, but there are 3 reasons they're not going to buy the car. It's either, and I call them the 3 M's. It's either me, the machine, or the money. What else is it? So I don't take no very easy for an answer. Never have. Might be known as a bullhead.
Well, we talk about that concept a lot on our show that we produce here that we're filming for today, is keeping going and not taking no and finding whatever the route is to get to the goal that you want to achieve. If you were going to give yourself advice 20 years ago for today?
I think I'd have had a better strategic plan about growth, where I wanted to grow and how I wanted to grow. I think that some of the good franchises I wasn't quick to react with. You don't mind a Bullheaded Story, do you?
I love them.
So as a product of World War II, we didn't think too highly of the Japanese. And when I first came to town, I didn't have a Japanese franchise. Now I have probably the best franchise out there in the world, and it's Toyota. And I have 3 Hyundai stores. But it took a lot to mellow because everything I learned in the 40s was about what the Japanese and the Germans did to us, okay? So I wouldn't allow the newspaper on my property with a Japanese car. And I'm not saying I'm proud of that today. I was bullheaded, but at least I had a philosophy about it at the time. Do I think it was wrong today? Yeah. But if you read about the Japanese in World War II, there were a lot of atrocities, and I've certainly read every book I can about World War II. And I think when you're my age, you sort of grew up that certain guys were heroes in World War II in Korea. And so, I worked harder to understand this better and what's going to happen because it's truly a world economy today.
It is. Do you hear any bad advice out there today? Do you hear managers or leaders spewing some bad advice that you would say, hey, I don't agree with that?
No, I don't think so. I don't think I hear too much of that. We try hard to remain structured and we can always do better. Like I said, I joke around. Probably half the population owns a Bible, but they don't read it. Probably including myself, but I say be careful how you live each day, and these are not my words. You might be the only Bible somebody reads. So I assume that we need to be good, we need to stand up tall, shine our shoes, look right for all we come in contact with. And Covey said it, that the footsteps of a farmer are the best fertilizer. So I'm thankful that I don't know where else when I hear America getting bashed. I don't know any other country, and my wife came from Germany as after World War II with nothing. And I have a lot of respect for that. I don't know any other country that you could accomplish what I think I've accomplished. And, you know, we're not born to the right family or just an ordinary guy that worked hard and kept his mind focused. And I think we're living in a pretty good country. I think sometimes we forget it. We're a little hard on it. I don't quite understand it.
So today at 81, what motivates you? What excites you?
I like the term, here we grow again. I like to grow. I just want to keep growing. It may not be the right thing at 81. I'm not sure how my family feels about it, but I think if you're not growing and you're maintaining, and I think George Patton said it, you don't maintain anything. You're either going, like a bicycle won't stand on its own. It only goes somewhere when it's going forward, right? Very few people can pedal a bike backwards, nor can they sit on it, balance it. So I think we have to keep moving forward, or I'm not sure at my age if you stopped, what would you do? Sit around and wait? I mean, that's the alternative, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah, so.
50 years from now, what do you want people to say about Fred Beans?
You know, I would want them to say that I was a good person to work for. You get me a little emotional, that they benefited from the experience of knowing me, that they never saw me intoxicated, okay? I don't think, I've been divorced. I'm probably not proud about that, but the rest of my socks are pretty clean, and I'm certainly not going to tarnish them at my age, so I think that's what I like to be known for. I also feel like we tithe pretty well to our community and the importance of giving back.
Talk to me about that. What are some of the things that are important today for you to be involved with and give to?
Well, right now we have a challenge on in our company to feed 500,000 people in Bucks County, in Hunterdon County, Chester County, and out in Harrisburg, and over in Flemington, wherever we've contributed to that. And we've tried to get our employees involved in a food bank. I worked in a food bank one day we put food in, I think, 245 cars, either food for one family, two families, or three. And that was a pretty humbling experience, but we've been doing that every week until we get to 500,000. We've been big contributors to Doylestown Hospital, the YMCA, and the Doylestown Library. I think, and probably none of these words are my words, but the books you read, the movies you see, and the people you hang around with determine who you are. So I am big on, and I try to encourage my employees to read books together. So I think we've been very good about tithing to our community. I think hopefully nobody gets buried with money, and it's something about, I think I mentioned it to you earlier, I can't remember anybody giving me anything that I really felt that good about. I always have felt better when you give somebody else a gift. And generally, if I give somebody a book, I always give it to them gift wrapped, because I don't want them to think that I just took it off the shelf, but that it was gift wrapped. It was a gift from me to you. And I'm big on reading, because I think it expands our knowledge.
What's the future of this dealership and this company in 10, 20, 30 years? Who's going to be here? What's it going to look like?
You know, it's very difficult to understand, because today service is so important in our business and the servicing of automobiles that I'm not sure the effect of, I think our facilities are too massive that the manufacturer asks us to build too fancy a facility. And with so much business online, I'm sure that we want a nice place when they get there, but it sure as heck doesn't matter before you get there. You know, if they find the car they want. So I think that it's, I think that's a little scary. I think the instant gratification of Amazon today, the book at your house tomorrow, the car is becoming more and more of a commodity. There's not a bad, and when I grew up, there were bad cars and good cars. Ford, the joke, it used to be fix or repair daily. That's what it stood for. It was General Motors was without a question of a doubt, the best. And even when the Japanese came here, they sort of failed with quality, but through Edward Deming and what they learned about World War II, they probably have the best quality today. I do worry about electrification because I wonder what the size of a service department will be. Will our facilities be overbuilt? Will the car be so safe that it's no longer an accident? Will there be more, with young people, there'll be more car sharing, cars not as important? The mobility is, Uber, the car's at the front door. I think that's something, and maybe the demise of I think the family unit's not the same. It might be out of my wheelhouse.
Well, hopefully the business will pivot and be able to react and roll with the tides.
Well, I think there's always going to be a need. I don't, autonomous vehicles, I think they're a little ways off, right? Autonomous trucks, I think they're a little ways off. But I think not in the next 10 years because cars are looked at in buckets of 10 years. And right now, I think the average car on the road is about 11 years old. So I think we have at least 10 good years left, provided we don't have any severe economic downturns.
Right.
We have 10 good years left.
Interesting. Well, Fred Beans.
I'd be interested in knowing what your thoughts are on that.
I feel, from someone who's not in the car industry, I think young people are not going to be long-term owners and purchasers of cars. I think that the generations coming up, like with housing and owning a home, I think they're going to be fewer homeowners. I think there's going to be fewer car owners. I think that people are going to gravitate towards walkable communities where they can get their entertainment, food, nightlife, movies, and shopping by being able to walk there. And perhaps these suburban communities, although during the pandemic was the best thing for these suburban communities because it breathed life into them.
Yes.
Housing stock that was aged and fading and dilapidated sometimes are been bought and new families are living them now. Without the pandemic, a lot of these communities in the suburbs would be suffering. But look, maybe Beans' family of dealerships is going to find ways to participate in the driverless electronification and the automation phase that's coming. You certainly have the parts business. They're going to need parts, so I think that's probably going to survive for you. And whether or not you're selling as many cars, or if you're servicing the electric cars, or if you're providing some sort of other essential service in the industry, I think you're going to find the way.
Certainly, working at home has reduced our collision center business is coming back, but it's probably about 85% of what it was.
Yeah.
And that becomes difficult to make a profit.
Right.
But
people weren't out on the roads getting in accidents.
And I noticed today on the Turnpike it was because so many people are working from home.
Hopefully this gets behind us quickly. Fred, thank you. This was great.
Pleasure.
I learned a lot. I think the people that watch our channel are going to learn a lot. I love you. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fred.
If you like what you just heard, you can subscribe to The Daily Cash Flow on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'd love it if you left us a review. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at SiegelCap and on Instagram at Siegel.cap. As always, if you're an accredited investor, go to SiegelCapital.com and take our survey to see if you qualify to take part in one of our apartment building deals. That's SIEGEL Capital.com.